ANU Student Research Conference 2020. Before we begin, we acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So naturally, many students who take part in research as an undergrad are interested in pursuing postgrad research as well. However, it can seem pretty unclear as to what the whole process of undertaking a PhD is like. So today we are super privileged to be hearing from three panellists who are coming from wildly different academic backgrounds and who are either current PhD candidates or recent graduates. They'll be sharing their experiences of pursuing a PhD and lending their advice for any aspiring PhD candidates in the audience today. So just for our audience members, we have a little Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom where you can send in your questions, and we will be taking questions from 1:40 p.m. onwards. If you'd like to ask your question in person, just privately message me and I can unmute you. So my name is Sai and I am an undergrad student here at ANU, and I'm delighted to introduce our three panelists today. So firstly, we have Rose Clifford, who is a current third-year psychology PhD student, and she works as a tutor and teaching assistant within the ANU Research School of Psychology. Her current research focuses on a newly emerging eating disorder known as orthorexia nervosa, which she presented at the 2019 3-minute thesis final at the ANU. She's also an avid volunteer with MIE ACT and Lifeline, and she was recently awarded the Young Canberra Citizen of the Year award for her volunteer work in mental health. And today we're also joined by Dr. Val Karma, who is a lawyer and an academic, as well as being awarded the 2020 Hank Nelson Prize for his PhD thesis on Papua New Guinea. Dr. Karma is a recipient of the Commonwealth Pacific Young Person of the Year Award and is the founder and director of the Karma Foundation, which is a community NGO operating in remote PNG villages. And finally, we have Sally Davis, who is a current PhD candidate at the ANU Centre for Arab and Islamic Studies, and she was awarded first-class honours for her honours thesis, which was written in Arabic and centred on the socio-economic transformations that followed the Islamic State insurgency in Iraq. She's currently working as a writing coach for ANU Academic Skills. So before we begin, could our panelists tell us a little bit about your thesis? Shall we start with Sally?
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I guess my study's aiming to develop a kind of understanding of the strategies that are used by women to keep themselves secure in Iraq, because this country's been plagued by violence against an evolving genre of unconventional war. So this is characterised by everyday threats to women's human security, and that coincides with a rapid deterioration in, I suppose, the gender egalitarian nature of Iraqi society as it presented itself probably 30 years ago. So it's a phenomenon that needs understanding, especially in light of the recent Islamic State insurgency. And I guess the aim of my study is to really capture the perspective of Iraqi women and how they actually see their role at the civil society level and within even their family, to just keep themselves secure and safe against certain kinds of abstract threats, which might be to do with coexisting with armed groups.
Thank you. And Val, would you like to tell us a little bit more about your thesis as well?
Thank you, Sai, and hello everyone. It's nice to be here and to participate in this wonderful forum. My thesis is on Papua New Guinea, Papua New Guinea Constitution, and it specifically looks at the sets of relationship between the courts, judiciary, especially the Supreme Court and the Parliament, and why there seems to be tension between the two arms of government, and tensions in a way that Papua New Guinea has a history of having various constitutional crises, and often between the Supreme Court and its decision and Parliament. So my thesis was interested in trying to understand what really caused those crises, and if anything, how can we fix it going forward so that we can minimize instability and that sorts of issues in terms of the constitutional relationship.
Wow, thank you. And Rose?
Hi, so thanks for having me first up. So my research and my entire PhD is focused around, I guess, just gathering more information on a newly emerging eating disorder. Since it's so recently being researched, there's not a lot on it in terms of its prevalence rates, how it impacts people, that kind of stuff. And there's major questions around whether or not it is a new eating disorder or whether it fits better into currently recognised eating disorders. So the eating disorder is termed at the moment orthorexia nervosa, which basically translates to pure eating. And so unlike current eating disorders that some people might be familiar with, instead of having a focus on shape or weight loss or those kinds of aspects, it's focused more around an obsession with healthy eating. So the focus is on the quality of the food being consumed, not the quantity. And what we're finding so far in the research is that it can lead to similar kinds of health difficulties and mental health difficulties that we're seeing in other eating disorders, but that it just doesn't follow that same focus on the physical appearance of the person. So yeah, my research is just trying to help contribute to that knowledge and build up a better understanding of what we're actually looking at so that we can develop more targeted treatment methods for it.
Thank you, Rose. I'm sure we can all agree those all sound really interesting and have really interesting applications. So we're very lucky to have you all on the panel today. We'll start off with our first question which was, what was your journey to taking a PhD? Like, what inspired you to pursue a PhD here at ANU? Sally, would you like to go first?
I guess I went straight from the honours thesis, and in the final chapter of my honours thesis, I ended up exploring a topic that I realised it kind of opened a door. My honours thesis was kind of related to this. It kind of explored the impacts on civilian Iraqis more generally in terms of socioeconomic impacts. So it was like promises kept by an insurgent group and then some promises broken with enormous consequences in terms of the social contract that this insurgent group had with this population. And it kind of opened a door in the final chapter where I was talking about women and their concept of the Islamic State being a protectorate for women to make sure that they were respected in terms of framed in sort of Salafist terms or radical extremist terms. So doing the PhD was really, I guess, going back to the start of my honours year, I hadn't thought about doing the PhD, and it kind of, I think, probably evolved around, could be about this time last year, maybe a little bit before. And I started talking to my supervisor about preparing a PhD application. So I didn't go into honours with the intention of doing a PhD. It was kind of born from the topic, as well as in combination with a conversation that evolved between myself and my supervisor.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting. Thank you, Sally. And what about you, Val?
Thank you, Sa. I think this is a very important question because PhD can be a very lonely endeavor, and you are committing some of your best time in your life, some of the zeal and energy of your youthful years to trying to sit through a 4x4 office box for another 4 or 3 years, saying hello to books every morning. So I think PhD is a journey that is quite demanding. So I think for me, I had to consider that, and then I think what pushes me forward or held me up and saying, look, I need to take the PhD is finding the reason for what I'm doing. And when I realized that my contribution may contribute to better understanding an issue, and that it can contribute to a nation's problem, I think that gives me that push, saying, look, I can stand up to those isolation, I can bear those loneliness, I can go through the sacrifice, because at the end, there is a better outcome to it. So I think one has to really make those decisions and has to consider the demands of PhD. I think the reason for doing it can be really, really important to identify it from the very start. And that's what I find that helps me.
Thank you. And on that, did you know what you were in for before you started a PhD? Like, did you know it would be a very sort of lonely and difficult experience?
I think, because I came from honours as well, and in terms of I've done honours at the undergrad, so I've already realized the environment for research. Research can be a lonely endeavor in that you are on your own doing things. You have the supervisors around you, but they're not there to hold your hand. And I think, there is a greater sense of independence going through. So having done already some prior research helps me to understand or expect what is to come. In terms of being a independent pursuit, I think that you will have to accept it from the very start. I did some homework. I did some research around asking people, and I got some of those tips. So I guess my mental space was accepting of what is to come. But that doesn't mean that I fully comprehend what is to come. There were some surprises, and I'm sure as we get along, we can talk about it.
Thank you, Val. And what about you, Rose? Like, what inspired you to take a PhD here, ANU?
So for me, I did honours, as you normally have to, particularly in psychology. There's a very particular process to postgraduate study or progressing in the career. And so I was initially on the pathway to clinical psychology. And so from the get-go, when I started my undergraduate, I was like, I'm going to need to do honours. I'm going to need to do either a master's or a PhD. And so when I did honours, I knew that the next step was another research degree, whether that was a 4-year one or a 2-year one. I knew that that's where I wanted to go. And so I applied for the PhD knowing that I was going into a research degree, but I was applying for a clinical PhD, which meant that there was the coursework side of it too for the clinical psychology aspect. I didn't get in the first year I applied, and the supervisor I had found for the application told me that she wanted to take on my research project with me, even just as a research student, not a clinical student. And so that was kind of how I fell into it. And then after the first couple of years, I decided that this is kind of where I wanted to sit for a bit, because I was really getting into it in that regard. Why I picked the area I wanted to study in, I didn't do anything similar in honours. In psychology honours, you're very confined to what you can do ethically, given that you have no real training and you have no real qualifications. So I did something completely different. But my desire to research eating disorders stemmed from my own experience with one. And so coming off of the back of that, I wanted to look into what I could do in the research area to improve the outcomes of people who went through similar experiences to me, but maybe didn't have as positive of an outcome. And so I started looking into anorexia. And then looking into the anorexia research, I was like, oh, okay, what's this new thing that people are talking about that started to come out of nowhere? And I started looking more into that. This was all before I had even applied for a PhD. This was all like December when the applications had gone in, but I had no idea if I'd gotten in. And I just got so into this area that I'm looking at because it was so new, there was so little to it. And I thought, you know, they need the research. And if there are people suffering and I'm willing to do it, why not do it? So much like Val and Sally, you know, there was a need that we saw that we thought we could make a difference in helping. And so that was really how I got into it. And I started loving it. I love the research aspect. I love the connection with the people I'm interacting with as part of it. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up where I am. Clinical is still in my future. It's just that switched as a priority for me to be after the research.
Thank you, Rose. I feel that a common theme in all of your answers is that you decided to do a PhD because you were really interested in the topic that you were studying. But I'm sort of wondering, do you think it's more important to pursue a PhD because of the topic or because of the supervisor? And how important do you think choosing the right supervisor is for doing a PhD?
Do you want me to say something, Sai?
Yes.
I think, I suppose if the question is what comes first, the topic or the supervisor, I think my way of answering that would be, first of all, a broad topic, a broad, vague topic comes first. So, well, this is for me anyway, or it's like an area of interest. And when I say area of interest, it's not merely a something that you just kind of enjoyed in your undergrad. It's sort of, you know, I like that topic. That was interesting. It's a little bit more than that. It has to be something. My topic was actually drawing me in throughout my whole undergrad. It had actually started drawing me in when ISIS first established the insurgency in Iraq in 2014. It intrigued me. It intrigued me that the media was quite obsessed with this new phenomena of foreign fighters. And as a security studies student, sort of just starting out, that was pretty interesting, that there were Europeans travelling over to Iraq and Syria. And I thought, where are the Iraqis? And I was quite drawn to this topic subconsciously throughout my undergrad degree. And it was, so I really want to emphasize, it's not just a topic you're interested in. It has to be something, well, for me, that was continually luring me in and kind of intriguing me in a certain way. And then it kind of, all the stars sort of aligned. My study of Arabic was going very well. I'd tried to study 4 languages in the past. It didn't work. Arabic was clicking. It was working. I'd learned how to study a language. And I had sort of, so I knew my supervisor for about 4 or 5 years at this point. And then step 3, the proper topic. So this broad area of interest becomes a topic, and it gets shaped and shaped and shaped. So my start date was actually the day of the Canberra hailstorm. It was the 20th of January, I remember it. And from that moment, my topic has become more and more clear in my own mind. Every day it becomes a little bit clearer what I'm actually doing. And I'm talking from a social sciences perspective very specifically. I don't know if a science student would be able to relate to what I just said, because you've got to conceptualize a problem in social science, is it doesn't always have a lot of definition. It can be a little bit abstract. So to sum up, first, broad topic, so kind of an interest. Second, supervisor. Third, proper topic.
Thank you, Sally. That was very interesting. And Bao, did you have an answer for that as well? Thoughts?
Yeah, the way I look at it is that topic gets you into a boat, but for you to reach the destination, you need the supervisors. For you to not get overboard or hitting ice bag and not getting thrown over because of waves, you need good supervisors. So if you look at it, you will need both. You can't get into that both without a topic. Why I'm saying it, because topic has to be something that you are so passionate about that you gotta say that, look, I have to go into this boat and do the long sea journey. And for you to do that, there has to be something that gets you into it. And I think topic is would be definitely up there as something that you are passionate about, you find reason to do. But you cannot reach the destination. From my experience and from listening to many others, supervisors are quite critical to really making you to be having a smooth ride and reaching that destination. And I said that because I changed my supervisor along the way. And that's something that potential PhD students out there who are now listening in might think about. Some of the faculties will give you supervisors because they think this is what you need, or these groups of people will be helpful to your work. But as you travel along, you might find that some of them, perhaps, while they are great at their field of expertise, they may not particularly be, suitable to the kind of direction that you want. And so you will have to make a call along the way, whether or not you do want to sail and you feel like they will take you through. And so that is a difficult stage in a PhD student's life, the decision to change supervisors. And for me, I just felt like I need to change in order to, get the completion done. So think about that as well, I guess, for potential PhD students, that you can have both of that happening. And like Sally said, there could be a change in topic. Yes, I agree. You come from broad to very narrow. And then there could be a change in your supervisor, because both of them are critical for you to reach that journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Bao. That was very enlightening, but also very scary. And what about you, Rose? How did it work out for you?
So for me, when I decided I was wanting to apply for a research-based degree, I knew I had to try and find a supervisor that was in line with the broad area that I wanted to research in. So like Sally said, you do start with a broad area. So for me, it was eating disorders. So I wanted to do research in that area. So I needed to look at the faculty that was at the ANU in the RSP and figure out who I should reach out to see if they would give me a shot to do 4 years of research with them. And I was very lucky with my supervisor. I hit the supervisor jackpot as far as I'm concerned. And so my whole experience with that, I've not had to change supervisors. My topics kind of been focused in this direction and then moved a little bit here and there. But they're both incredibly important things. Like, you can't go to your supervisor in postgraduate. In honours, it's a bit different, but in postgraduate, you can't go to them and say, hey, I like you. Can you tell me what I should be researching for the next 4 years? Because you're gonna burn out in year one because you don't care enough about what you're doing. So you definitely do need to have a topic that isn't just of interest, as Sally said, but it means something to you to do the research in the area, and something that you want to see come to fruition in 4 years. But then equally said, if your supervisor isn't supportive, isn't there for you, isn't the right person or the right fit for what you're trying to do, it can feel very overwhelming, given that you're very new to the field and the area of study, particularly with sciences. Some of the techniques that we're using are very strange and very new, and they do require supervision, or they do require somebody who has an expertise in it to show you how to do it, or else you actually aren't allowed to. So you do need a supervisor who's willing to teach you along the way. And I'm not just speaking to psychology, with physics and chemistry and bio, you're using equipment and machinery and stuff that is very reliant on being taught by your supervisor how to operate. So those are all things to consider. You need to make sure that you've got your topic, for one, and that you're finding a person who wants to help you get to the end goal that you've got. But definitely, if you don't have the drive, it doesn't matter how amazing your supervisor is, you're not going to get to the end. But I know people in psych who have had to switch supervisors because they had the drive, but the supervisor wasn't supportive, or the supervisor didn't support them in the ways they needed. So both are very important. I think I started with a topic, I found the supervisor that was going to get me there, and it's been a partnership ever since, where I'm in the driver's seat, but I know that I'm very well supported by the second in command. So you need to develop that partnership with them.
Thank you. It's sort of come up that sometimes unexpected things happen, like having to change supervisors. So I was wondering, what has been the most difficult part of all of your journeys, and what has been some unexpected difficulties that might have popped up, and how did you overcome them? Sally, did you have any insight?
I actually think that, I guess I'm probably a little bit too early on to give a really informed answer to that, so I won't waste too much time on it. The actual conditions under which we're working at the moment, the whole 2020 issue, has it was a little bit of a spanner in the works, even though PhD students have a reputation of being on an isolated journey. We haven't been unaffected. We've had to rethink, those of us in our early stages of the project have had to rethink how we're going to do study design or research design, how we're actually going to get to participants. And I had to have a really, I had to engage very, very deeply with the ethical implications of actually interviewing Iraqi women by Zoom, as opposed to being able to create a safe environment as an interviewer. So I've had to trawl through the literature on online interviewing. I'm an expert in Zoom fatigue now. I'm also an expert in using an interpreter over voice conferencing systems. I'm also an expert in encryption. So that was very unexpected. And I've also had to toy with the idea of, how does COVID-19 affect my topic? And it actually does, because what's actually happened in Iraq at the moment is it has uncovered a major issue in terms of basically they're trying to get through the Iraqi parliament at the moment, desperately trying to get through some amendments to the laws on domestic violence. And they can't get these laws through. And these laws are basically about legalising shelters for women who might be experiencing domestic violence, to get them out of actually rescue them from the family, as opposed to reconciling them with the family, because that's really built around a lot of Iraqi nationalism around making sure the family's kept intact as opposed to actually removing the person from a difficult situation. And so that's become really, I've got to sort of think through a lot of how that's going to come into my research. And I'm thinking, do I write a sort of extra chapter on COVID-19 impacts? How am I going to do this? Because you're dealing with grey literature. Nothing's peer reviewed yet on this topic. The peer review cycle takes a long time. So I would be having to look for just different, kind of like just trying to gather information about what's going on in a different way. So it's a little bit daunting, but I think that I have a responsibility to cover it. If I'm going to cover this topic, I can't ignore what's happening in that space. So yeah.
Thank you, Sally. That sounds like it's very difficult and sensitive terrain to navigate on, but we hope it works out well for you. And Bal, I think you mentioned something similar about things coming up that you didn't expect would happen during your PhD. You're on mute.
Yes. So, no, it is quite important to talk about challenges. I've already pointed out the challenge of changing supervisor. That's something that one has to really. It is a challenging place to be at, and pray you're not there in those circumstances. But if you have to make those decisions, yes, I think that's going to be a challenging thing. Another thing that will be challenging for, and then for me when I first came to PhD, is the demand of trying to manage multiple commitments. So I was doing teaching, I was doing publishing, I was doing media work in terms of interviews and commentaries and stuff like that here in Australia and across the region. And then I was doing my PhD. So every week trying to change your mind and put them into different scenarios and trying to be up to date with issues so you can be quite relevant in what you're talking about, and then jump back to PhD can be very, very exhausting. And if you're someone who's not comfortable with trying to manage multiple things, or who hasn't had the experience of doing that can be really stressful too. Again, you have the option of choosing not to. You can say no to all these things, but if I can probably note it later on, there are benefits to it. But at this stage, yes, balancing multiple commitments can be depressing or exhausting, however one is suited to. The other thing, I guess, is to be prepared to be humbled. You're a student, not an expert. You are here to contribute to understanding the issue, not to become the solution finder. So all this ideal of, if I'm doing a PhD, I'm going to solve the world's issue, that has to be, packed away in your silos and locked with a big deadlock, because you must be prepared to be humbled, to be corrected, to be given feedback that will say, look, yes, thank you very much, but there's bigger things out there and this is the start of something. So I think that process of humbling, if you are someone who is not prepared to be humbled, to be put in your rightful place, PhD can be I guess, a stressful thing. So just come into the journey prepared to be humble, prepared to be a student and not an expert. I guess that's enough for me. Thank you.
There's some very wise words of wisdom. Thank you, Val. And what about you, Rose?
So for me, I think COVID would probably be the biggest hurdle I'm having to deal with at the moment, because of the structure of what my research was going to entail. I've basically had to scrap it at the beginning of year 3 and start from midway through year 1 again. So I've got all the research knowledge and I've done all the background reading, but the the study I was going to do and the outcomes I was hoping to achieve aren't feasible given what's happened with COVID. And that's because my research was designed around 2-hour interview sessions face-to-face with participants in a relatively small room. And when I just got an ethical approval, COVID had hit, the university locked down, and ethics basically said that no studies that were involving this kind of close contact were going to be able to go ahead. So I had to make the decision as to whether or not I would wait it out, not knowing how long these provisions would be in place, or whether I would change tact and basically put the last couple of years of developing this study and the measures for the study and all that to the side and pick something else up. And ultimately I decided on the latter. And so I've just recently released the study that has come out of the COVID wave, and that's ticking along and it's all good. But yeah, that was, I guess, the biggest hurdle is that in terms of where I'm at, I'm basically the equivalent of where I was at, you know, maybe a year ago. So I feel like I've lost a bit of a year, but also, you know, you can't really control for these things. And like Sally said, eating disorders, you know, are heavily impacted by COVID. So I too have to consider whether or not this is something that I need to consider in terms of what I'm trying to research. But yeah, I think the thing with the PhD is, you know, you're gonna, in any postgraduate study, you're gonna be thrown curveballs left, right and center, you know, whether that's somebody who you needed to work with not being able to work with you, whether that's, you know, you're not getting access to the materials you need to, whether that's ethics holding you up, time limits for other things, not being allowed to go into certain countries to conduct certain research, financial issues, like if you don't have the money for the research, you can't really do it. All of those things are going to arise. And I think the thing you need to remember is that, like, even if your research doesn't go perfectly to plan, it doesn't mean what you're going to get at the end of it isn't going to be valuable, and it isn't going to make a difference to what you've been doing. I think the other thing, the other hurdle I confronted was just loneliness. PhDs are isolating. You're left to your own devices, you're very independent, and you just don't, you're not going into a classroom and hanging out with people on a weekly basis. You're not connecting with people in that same way. You might have a fortnightly or weekly meeting with your supervisor, but that's one person. And so you are, to a degree, stripped of all those social connections that university and being an undergraduate student just kind of gave you. So that was another thing. And so I had to, my first year I was so isolated, and then the second year I was like, I'm so sick of this, what can I do? And you have to start looking for these opportunities. So I think that's probably the biggest hurdle, because that just crushed my motivation and my own well-being and kind of threw me for a loop. The research stuff and all that, you'll find a way out of it. You will, or your supervisor will help you find a way out of it. There's always knowledge that can be gained, even if it wasn't the knowledge you originally wanted to gain. But I think maintaining my social connections and well-being has been the hardest hurdle through this whole experience. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Rosemary. We'll start taking questions from the audience now, and I'm really glad you brought that topic of loneliness up, because we have a question from Zayenia, who asks, how do you deal with the loneliness that PhD students tend to feel during your PhD?
I can jump in there. I've actually, I guess the biggest, in terms of academic support for your PhD, you've got your supervisor. But in terms of just general social support, for me, it was other PhD students. And as Rose sort of indicated, it's you kind of have to work on cultivating those. And so in my school, we've made a little bit of an effort. There's about 24 of us in my actual school. And we've made an effort we're doing like a reading group. And what we do is we meet once a month and we're reading each other's chapters. So we're kind of giving each other a little bit of peer feedback on each other's chapters, and at the same time sort of building our knowledge about what our colleagues, our professional colleagues are writing about. That's been really helpful. We've also done some deliberate, one of my panel members has organised a Zoom meetup once every 2 weeks with other students that he's on the panel for. That has been really helpful. It's pretty much a session where we just shoot the breeze. We just talk about anything. We actually talk about rubbish. That's what we're there for. And at the same time, as I want to go back to something Bal said before about your supervisor's support, there's something really, really important that you do at the start of the PhD, or they do encourage you to do, is actually sort out expectations between you and your supervisor, what you expect of each other. And when we did it, there's a document you can download on the HDR website, and it sort of has like a Likert scale of, what you expect. And then you get your your supervisor to fill out what they expect of you. And then you sort of work out where you don't align, and then you have a conversation about it. So I did that. I printed it off and I gave it to her. Okay, today we're going to play a game. We're going to fill out this survey. We're going to talk about expectations of each other. And it was the most valuable conversation I've ever had with her. Because 2 weeks later, COVID-19 hit. And we already knew our expectations. We had a system. We had, she knew that I was going to drive this thing, and I was going to set the goals, and I was going to go, this is what I'm going to get done in this amount of time. And all I expect of you is that you read it and you look at it, within the 2 weeks, and I'll never send you anything. And I said to her, I'll never send you anything and expect you to read it in 24 hours. I'll always send you something a week before we meet. And we laid some really basic ground rules. We also had a conversation about, if I have an issue that affects my PhD, yes, I do expect you to sort of have some compassion there. But if I have an issue that's got nothing to do with the PhD, then I really don't expect you to care too much about it. So we had a really valuable conversation. Yeah, so that was incredibly important.
Thank you, Sally. And what about you, Bal?
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So just to add to Sally, one of the things that I did was joining local sporting clubs, for instance, or team, like going and play touch footy every week, and that makes me to be like I am part of a community. You may not play sport, or you might do something else, but being part of a community is important. I think apart from being community within your own PhD, I would also encourage you to be part of a team of something else altogether. So that takes you away from PhD cohorts and groups to, bunch of guys or girls who are doing completely something else. And then you guys just talk about life and talk about whatever that's involved in them. So I think that takes your mind away from your 9-to-5 PhD bogged down environment. The other thing would be to connect. What I find is connecting with my family, and I think they're a source of inspiration. They're always out there saying, "Look, we believe in you. You can get through this." And I think having that regular connection with the family, whether it's your mom and dad or siblings, would be really useful to keep you focused on your path. Again, there is no easy answer I would think from my experience in terms of loneliness that comes with PhD, and we hear already from Rosemary, about that. There is that inherent, I guess, loneliness that comes with it, because this is what's expected. But you can do as much as you can to get away from that and detach. And please do.
I feel that's some really good advice. And what about you, Rose? Since you brought it up, like, how did you deal with like the feeling of loneliness, especially in your first year?
Yeah. So it was very tricky for me in the first year. I've always been an introvert. I've always found that I do work quite well on my own. So I thought it would be okay. I was like, oh yeah, it'll all be fine. But I realized that even the 4 classes I would go to as an undergraduate a day was really keeping me going. And so just not having those just crushed that aspect. So for me, like Paul said, I've joined a sporting group outside of, the uni. Like well, we're all PhD students in psychology, but we all go and play netball on Tuesdays. And, so we're all forming those connections with each other, but we're not making the focus the PhD. Because sometimes when all you do is talk about and work on and do your PhD, it's really hard to not get that tunnel vision effect of just being so overwhelmed with this one thing. The other thing I do is I tutor and I volunteer. So through tutoring, I'm teaching other students, undergraduate students, about psychology. But I'm also getting that connection. You go into a classroom, not these days, but used to go into a classroom of, 25 to 30 people, and you're having those connections with them. And then with volunteering, the volunteering I do, I go into schools and I share my mental health journey, and I answer questions about that, or I work with Lifeline answering calls. And so these are all the things that for me helped fulfill that social connection that I was lacking by starting the PhD and just being so isolated. I think while it's incredibly important to do what Sally said and find those connections amongst fellow PhD students that help you with your steps towards your PhD, it's also really important to find those connections where that isn't the focus as well, and you can just kind of have a bit of fun and not worry about the weight of the research. And that, am I able to answer one of the questions that's in the Q&A about psychology?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's one about psychology to do with wanting to do research in music and psychology. For one, that's such an interesting area to combine the two. Actually, there's a lot of research about the benefits of music. PhD life is very stressful, and you're hearing from us as PhD students who are victims of something that we like to call imposter syndrome. One thing you get when you start a PhD is you get a supervisor, you get a research project, and you get this overwhelming feeling that you know nothing about anything. And unfortunately, that does add a lot of the stress to what you're doing. So don't get us wrong, it is stressful. It is a really tough 4 years, but it is also really empowering of an experience to guide your own research and to make these impacts in a field that you've deemed lacking. So I think the thing when deciding whether or not you're going to take on a postgraduate study degree, you need to make the decision about, is this what I want to do? Is this research thing the job I want to take on for 4 years? It's not a side project. It's not you just kind of having a hobby. It's your job. And so if you want your job to be research and you want your job to be investigating in the area that you're interested in, then absolutely take it on. It's going to be stressful, but what job isn't stressful every now and then? And I think when you get in that headspace of it is your job, it can make it a bit easier. And reminding yourself that you're not actually in competition with anyone anymore. For psychology students, it's a massive weight on their shoulders that they are competing with fellow students. for prized honours positions and that kind of stuff. When you're into a PhD or a master's or anything like that, you're in, and you're not competing for your spot. Nobody's going to take it away from you. And so that was a very relieving experience for me to go, oh, wait a second, like I'm here. I've made it in this degree, and that's it. I just get to do my own thing for the next 4 years and hopefully find something out in an area I'm really interested in. The other thing is, it's only really, 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 really stressful if you don't have a supervisor who helps support you in those ways. I mean, any good supervisor would look at an incredibly stressed PhD student and be like, what can I do to help? Because this shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be that stressful that you're overwhelmed to the point of collapse almost. So that's kind of how you get around that, that thing, for me anyway. So don't let the stress or the feeling that it's going to be incredibly stressful deter you from a PhD if it is truly something you would like to do. Because if it is truly something you'd like to do, you will overcome that stress. You will push through it and you will come out the other end, you know, better than you went in. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Rose. Unfortunately, we will have to close at 1:55, but before we finish this panel, would you be able to share one piece of advice you'd have for aspiring PhD candidates or current PhD students, just to make their life a little bit easier? Sally, do you have any advice?
I think set daily goals. I go to bed every night and make sure I'm really clear on what I'm doing tomorrow. Weekly goals are great. Monthly goals also great. When you get into the milestone system, then that's what you need to do. But to stay on course, daily goals. And there's a huge theme around the supervisor relationship. I also want to emphasise, make sure every member of your panel plays a proper role. And it's not just about your supervisor. Choose them carefully and have a conversation. What, you know, can you bring to my research? You know, what are you going to do? You own this project, so make sure you choose your panel members wisely as well. They're incredibly important.
Thank you, Sally. Bal, do you have any closing advice for our audience members? Oh, you're just on mute.
Sorry, my internet went off a bit earlier on, so I was offline. Firstly, look, it is a great journey, and now that I have finished and looking back, when you have that doctor in front of you, and I think all the niceties that come with it, 4 years or 3 years is worth it. So please be encouraged. This session should not give you a lot of headache. It should give you a lot of hope that this is a great journey. Supervisor is so critical. So choose people that will support you through and that you are comfortable with. And if you can change them as well, if you have the option to, feel free to do that. It'll be a difficult path, but it is worth it. And I always say to myself, there is more to life than PhD. So when you are there hammering away 4 years of your life, don't be bogged down in that hallway. Look to your left, look to your right, look ahead. There's other places where you can become part of the greater conversation, and not just in your silos of PhD. I mean, that was my driving force, is to be involved while you are doing your PhD. I think that will really, really enrich your PhD by the end of the time when you come out. So if you have opportunities to be involved in the community, in the media, or to write for blogs or things like that, please get out there and become part of that greater community. Yeah.
Thank you, Bal. And Rosemary?
So on top of what Sally and Val just said, know that if you've gotten into a PhD or a master's or whatever postgraduate degree you're doing, you're there because you can do it. It's really easy to get stuck in that headspace of I can't do this and I'm not cut out for this. But they make judgments about offering PhD scholarships to students who they can see are able to do it. Your academic history, your other experiences have shown them that you've got what it takes. So try and remember that you do have it in you to complete the degree, regardless of how hard it feels. You're there for a reason. Somebody else said you could do it, so prove them right.
Great point, Rosemary. Yeah.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up now, but I just want to say thank you to our audience members for listening in today. And thank you to our incredible panelists who are far too overqualified and have also been kind enough to spare their time and experience. We hope you've all found this panel very interesting and hopefully informative. And we hope that everyone else will enjoy the rest of the conference. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for joining.